River Citizen. As you know, Brandon is recording, and that will be available on the website relatively soon. And we also prepare notes as well. Let me kind of go through basics of the Zoom, which most already know by now, but just to be clear, your control bar of Zoom is at the bottom. You've got to mute. You can mute yourself. We can mute you too if we need to, but we try not to, just unless there's sound quality issues. You can turn on and off your video. We'd love to see folks if your bandwidth is okay. And then if you want to raise your hand, there's under reactions, which is a little smiley face button. Within that, you have to tap on that, and in that is the raise hand function. It's kind of irritating. You've got to go one extra step to get in there, but there's a raise hand function in reactions. If you can't find that, just in chat, you can just type, I want to talk, and I'll be able to call on you. Because there's enough people, if you raise your hand physically, I might see you, but I might not, just because of the number of folks I can see. So try to use the raise hand or chat if you can, if you have a question or comment. Okay, and chat, I think people are free to use as you see fit. You can ask questions. We don't want it to be too distracting because we want to focus on the conversation, but people can use that. And if it gets a little wild, we'll let you know. So what I want to do is go through the agenda. I think in a second here, we want to give a recognition of one of our long-term members who has passed from us, Thelma Bartesini, who was such a wonderful person, and we want to give a little time for her and honor her memory and her work with us. We'll hear then an update from Tim from the TAG grant. Dean's then got a number of Rest of River updates. And then we have a upcoming Rest of River documents, just kind of quick review of those things. Quick note on work on kind of the kind of post remediation monitoring of the 2 mile stretch. John can give us an update on the permit. We'll take a public comment and we'll adjourn. Typically what we do as we go through each topic, we let the CCC members go first. And if there's time, we let the public go in too. So we'll try to get the public in there as well during the meeting, not just at the end. Is there any additions or corrections to the agenda that people want to add? Jane, I know there's one question you sent about sediment and the dams and dam removal. So Dean's going to cover that under Rest of River. So he'll get to that. I also just want to note that I know that some CCC members are thinking about and want to bring forward some ideas around the process for the CCC. And just want to note that we'll put that as an agenda holder for next meeting. But just want to note that because some folks reached out to me regarding that. Okay. All right. So first, I would really like all of us to take a moment of kind of just quiet to recognize Thelma. And then anybody who would like to speak, just to kind of remember a fond memory of her and her as a person and her as a CCC member, we'd like to offer that. So maybe I'm just going to go on mute and kind of give just 30 seconds of silent memory on behalf of Thelma. Would anyone like to share a quick memory or a remembrance of Thelma about her work with us? Valerie, go for it.
Yeah, hi. I'm gonna really miss Thelma. She was a hoot and passionate and very loyal to this cause and getting the PCBs cleaned up. I'm gonna really miss her passion. And I gave her rides sometimes, and I'm also gonna miss the stories about her life, which were quite fun. Especially when she told me about her relative Tito Barzi, who was Frank Sinatra's Jr.'s manager, and how he had a plane come to Pittsfield Airport one time to pick her up and take her to a big party in Los Angeles for the weekend. And she got back home and people at work asked her, "Oh, what did you do over the weekend?" She said she went to a party with Frank Sinatra Jr. and nobody believed her.
That's great.
He was great.
Thanks, Valerie. That was really nice.
I could say something about this Tim.
Yeah, Tim.
I would just say what I remember from Thelma is, wow, I think she was there on day one. You know, there was a meeting at the Italian American Club, and I think she might have been there that night. And it was very early on in the PCB fight, and Thelma was right, you know, was there in the early days, and she was with us, boy, for what, 15, 20 years here. So I want to give her a shout out for that perseverance.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Tim. Great point. Charlie.
Yeah.
I want to say, I think she'd be thrilled that we're all giving her a voice tonight. Her favorite thing was speaking at these meetings.
Thanks, Jane. Charlie.
As someone who grew up in Lakewood, I've known or knew Thelma longer than anybody else on the CCC, or I mean, I was a kid knowing Thelma and the Barzantini family and a lot of other Italians, obviously. I really respected Thelma for her passion, her dedication. Sadly, she never got into the electronic world. And so that forced the EPA to continue to mail things to her and get things to her that way. But that kept them on their toes too. So that was a good thing. And we certainly will miss her passion, her dedication, her loyalty to the movement. And sadly, once again, we lose a member here, and everybody else just seems to kind of drift away. GE just disappears. Sadly, we have to lose people the way we lose them. We will miss Thelma.
Thanks, Charlie. Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Peterson with Connecticut DEEP, and Thelma was just, first of all, I really admired her regular attendance and speaking up and her just diplomatic demeanor. Just a wonderful lady, and she's just so sweet. And you know, when I attended the meetings regularly in Lenox or wherever, she'd always usually, you know, ask me how I was doing, and you know, always thank me for driving up from Connecticut. And it really meant a lot to me, and I'm going to miss her along with everybody else. She was a wonderful lady.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
Lynn.
Sorry.
Anybody else? Tim Conway.
Can people hear me?
Yeah.
I didn't know how to raise my hand the way Susan did. But Thelma was one of the finest people I've ever met in my life. I just so admired her, like as everybody's saying, her persistence, her commitment, and there'd be times where she'd ask a question and I'd think, oh, I thought I'd get through the night without that question being asked. And then the next thing she'd say is, ask me about my family and, you know, and how the family was. And I thought she was just such a remarkable combination of positive characteristics. I will miss her.
Great, Tim, thanks so much. Jim McGrath.
I always appreciated how Thelma was always dressed up. She always had heels on and pearls, and she was always dressed to the nines. And something about that, I really appreciated that about Thelma. She was certainly dedicated to this cause, and she will be missed.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, this is Dean. Not to challenge Charlie, but he may have known her before, but she lived probably 200 feet from me growing up. And her son Mark was probably 3 years older than us. And back then you used to have to go outside to have fun. So we were always in the street playing football in the street. the standard 2 telephone poles was 100 yards, and knew her back then, didn't know her that well, but I knew her son certainly. And then with the meetings, and I think like Susan said, it was before and after the meeting. How's your family? How's your mother? How's your uncle? And then, as Tim said, she did ask the most difficult questions to answer. I will say she could boil down an issue real simple when you're thinking of a complex answer, and she could really zone in on what was important. And I was always impressed with that, but mostly just what a nice person she was, and never anything personal, always with a smile. So that's what I remember.
Thanks, Dean. Anyone else want to comment before we go on? Kelsey.
I'll just be quick, but when I heard about Thelma's passing, the first thing that I thought about was the last tour that she came on with us. And I think that's the last time I saw her. And she had not been doing well. And I think Judy picked her up and drove her, but she, clearly was not in the greatest health, and just same personality, so happy, again, dressed so nicely, and walked around with me like everybody else said, asking like how I was doing, how my family was doing. I think I had just, had my first son, and she was just all excited, and then, would flip back to the being very serious with poignant questions about the site. So I didn't know her as long as a lot of people here, but one of the better people that I've seen in the community, both in terms of their knowledge, their interests, and just their kindness as a human. So we'll miss her.
As I think Jane put in the chat, Thelma was a classy lady. She was gracious. She was incredibly kind, and we will, I think, all dearly, dearly miss her. So wish her and her family the very best. Okay, thanks all, and thanks for those really nice memories of a really honored member. Moving forward, a little hard to do that from her memories. Tim, I think it's your chance to give any kind of updates from the TAG grant recipient, any things you want to cover or share at this time before we dive into Rest of River. So Tim, over to you.
Yeah, I have a bunch of things to say. Everybody probably knows that the Environmental Appeals Board of the EPA ruled against us again, starting an exercise right now to just find out how many times the Environmental Appeals Board has actually ruled in the favor of the citizens versus the EPA. It'd be interesting to seeing how the judges in EPA are connected to this court, and they're connected to EPA. So we just wonder about that. We are in the midst of not having, whether you know, Peter Defer, our longtime advisor for the last 15, 20 years, has retired, passed on the baton, and we are looking for a new advisor to take his place. Very hard to find them with knowledge like Peter had. Few and far between, but we're zeroing in on a few of them, and we're hoping very soon we'll have somebody that'll come on board and be able to help us technically again. So we're looking at that. I wanted to mention some things that are still bothering me, and I just want to tweak everybody's mind to remember that some of these things have been brought up with some of the people around the table. I don't know if is Mass DEP there tonight?
I think Mass is. I think I see John Ziegler. Yes.
Yes, I am here.
John's here.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you guys, let's start with that one then. We got a fella over here with as you probably know, next to the proposed dump is what's called, I believe it's the old Schweitzer Maud. It might, or used to in the old days be called Kimberly Clark, and they built a dump up which is directly adjacent to where you guys are all going to build the dump. Okay, now this dump is very interesting because we've been looking at it. Now my neighbor, who has talked to the DEP about this already, and we've looked up some of the historical reports on the dump, and I know from just knowing about chemistry and things like that paper mills are sometimes known, especially the paper mills that used chlorine for creating dioxins. And in some of these dump reports, we see what they call dioxane reading. But when I look up dioxane versus dioxin, it seems like they're very related to each other. I'm trained in chemistry, but I'm still trying to figure that one out.
It's not gonna bother you that I'm watching.
What's that?
Tim, go ahead. I had to mute somebody. Go ahead. You're good.
Okay, I'm still good.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, so anyway, I just want to mention that there's orange stuff coming out of the dump, this dump leaking into my neighbor's lawn, and we want to know if there's dioxin in it. Now, the DEP came out and I guess they took a look at it. I wasn't there when they did, but I would think the DEP would spring for some dioxin testing on this guy's lawn, because if he's got dioxin in his lawn, dioxin is considered 10 times worse than PCBs. Now, the other thing we see on that dump is we flew a drone over it. And in the cap of that dump, there's cracks in it. You can see them right on the video. So we're saying that this dump is in bad shape. Who's ever supposed to be watching over dumps like this is not doing too good a job. I think maybe it's the DEP's job, guys. Maybe. I don't know. But anyway, it's a disturbing situation. We want to know whether there's dioxin in this stuff leaking into his yard. And we'd like to know it soon, because it's not right to leave this guy with this crap in there, with now finding out if he's got a serious problem and then making the company come in and take care of it. That's all that needs to be done. But somebody's got to have the authority, and I think DEP should have the authority to be able to make that company do this. So I'll leave that issue for right now.
Tim, is that okay if John? I don't know if John wanted to respond, but I just want to give him a chance.
Go ahead, John.
I just wanted to say that, I mean, dioxane or dioxins and dioxane are not the same chemicals, first of all. But as far as testing, I'm happy to follow up with our solid waste section to see what testing is required for that landfill, Tim. I'm not familiar with what that is, but I'm sure there is testing that's going on.
I wasn't there. I forget the guy that came out to this. The guy's name was, what's his name? Is Jim Costanero. What is his name? So, and somebody else came out to do this, but I'm just saying, somebody somebody needs to help this guy test to see it. I mean, their family is frightened by it because it's I looked up dioxane and dioxin, and it's very interesting because what I read is that dioxin is a higher classification, but dioxin is also part of that same group of chemicals. So I think they're very similar, John. I could be wrong on that, but I'd like to hear that from a real pro that knows those chemicals, because I have a feeling they're very close to one another. And I know that paper mills were famous for dioxins. All over the country, there's rivers polluted with paper mill waste that have dioxin associated with them, So I know that was part of what went on at the paper mills. That's all. I'm just saying this guy needs a fair shake.
Yeah, Tim, I'm happy to, bring your concern to the solid waste section at our department. And
thank you. That's all I'm asking.
Let them know
that
that
would be wonderful.
Okay.
I also just want to bring up again too, I'm still trying to sort out this issue with that the EPA wants people to take their wells off of line, okay? Which we find that incredibly bizarre, okay? Because the only reason we can come up with why they would want you to take your well off of line would because they're worried maybe someday that dump could leak. I don't know why there could be any other reason. If it's not going to leak and those liners are going to be perfect and everything's going to be hunky-dory forever, doesn't make sense to me. So you're making these guys take the wells off, and so your solution is to hook them up to town's water. Well, what does a person have a well for? So they don't have to buy town water is one of the big reasons. It's like on the top 3 reasons of why you have a well. And so now they're going to be forced to buy town water. Well, this is benevolent. Why isn't GE under this settlement forced to buy them water forever? That's what should happen here. It's a disgrace.
Dean, can you speak to that issue?
Yes, this has been brought up a few times. EPA, nor GE, nor is anybody requiring anybody to connect to municipal water. If you look at page 56 of the permit, what it says is the permittee, which is GE, shall identify all community and private water supply wells within 500 feet of the upland disposal facility and shall pay for the installation if the person wants it. So it's solely up to the owner's consent, owner's decision. There's no requirement. I think there is only one well within 500 feet. And it also says if in the event the well owner consents at a later date or any new water users come in, the permittee shall pay at the request of the public. So there's no mandate at all. It's very clear. It's in black and white. It's up to the individual. If they want to remain on their well, they can remain on their well. If they would like GE to pay for the hookup, GE's bound within 500 feet to hook that person up to a public water supply.
Okay. I still maintain that it is a very bad deal for these homeowners that have wells, whether you like, I mean, you guys don't, you think it's a good deal, I guess, but.
So
it's not.
Tim, not to interrupt, but whether it's a good deal or a bad deal, what you said was factually incorrect. There's no mandate for anybody to be hooked up to the well. So I'll stop now and you can finish.
Okay, well, maybe I was wrong, but I will go ahead. You know, Dean, let's continue on here, okay? So now we've had a conversation with Brian Olson about 8 months ago, maybe a year ago now, maybe, or longer even. But Brian was selling us the 25 parts per million in the dump is safe. He was then, when I questioned him, by the end of the night, he admitted that it's a Tosca dump and there could be up to 50 parts per million in it. And then we went into the issue of what's going to come through the pump, and nobody really knows what's coming to the pump. And you guys said to us, well, don't worry, because it'll average out, because we'll be pumping out much lower, lower amounts sometimes. So if we get a little high hit and stuff like this. Well, now there are some new studies out, guys. And what the public health people are saying, okay, not the EPA, what the public health people are saying, there's a new report that just came out that says 0.1 to 1 part per million can cause harmful effects in people. Okay, so now you guys are telling us 25 parts per million. Don't worry, it's totally safe. So who do we believe, EPA or public health people? Well, here, you know, at HRI, we believe public health people. Okay, and Dean and Brian and all you guys, you have made so many mistakes through the years. You've done a lot of good. I admit that. You've done a lot of great good, but you've made some fairly big tactical errors through the years. Some of those errors were caught by HRI, you might remember. And I'll drop that one. I'll move on. So since this new low dose study that came out, if we were reminded of another low dose study where they're seeing health effects in the parts per trillion. Okay. Now these are on a whole different level of 25 parts per million. You know, quite a bit lower. And again, who really knows? The science that actually work and study this stuff every day, or Brian Olson and Dean and you guys. So I think it's a little above you guys' heads too. It's a little above my head. But the low dose stuff is not looking pretty good in the scientific literature, guys. And it's starting to make 25 part per million, like I said right from the beginning, is not really safe for you. I would like to, let's see, what else do I want to bring up? I guess that's pretty good. I talked about the buy papers of paper. I think I got everything I want to say. I want to say that that HRI, we are in the process now that, well, we don't know now with the new COVID variant coming, but we're in the process of doing what we've always done, is bringing in science people into the county. We have 2 to 3 online ready to come as soon as we feel we can do an open meeting. And we will be doing those as soon as we can. Now we have to just figure out the next month whether the COVID's going to prevent us from doing those kinds of meetings. But We hope to bring, we have 2 or 3 scientists already that we've contacted, and we would like to be able to do some of those as soon as we can.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Jeff, you had a question, and I'm going to go to Dean to start talking about Rusted River.
Yeah, Tim, can you give us the citations for this public health information so more of us can start to catch up on that?
Yeah, on the, what do you want? You want the low dose stuff?
Yeah. But
Okay, let me see.
And Tim, if you have citations, you can put those in chat, and either the citation or even the link would be really helpful.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, I can't, I'm not near where they are right now, but what I can do is I can certainly email you the links. Jeff,
Great.
if you'd like me to do that, why don't you give me your email and I will take care of that.
Great. And Jeff, you can put that, you can actually just chat Tim directly.
I'm going to send him, I'll send it to you in a chat.
Okay, who's riverkeeper@gmail?
Great.
Who's HOUS riverkeeper@gmail? You can send me an email and I'll get that information together and send it to you.
Right. Thanks, Tim, so much. Jane, over to you. Oh, Jane, you're on mute there.
Sorry, just couldn't get to the unmute button. I just wanted to point out that EPA has not evaluated the risk concentration for PCBs via inhalation, which I find really, really disturbing. I dropped into the chat a seminar, I think it was last night at MCLA, with someone talking about PCBs, and I'll drop in the link for the fact that EPA hasn't evaluated the PCBs via inhalation.
And Jane, MCLA stands for?
Oh, I'm sorry, Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts.
Thank you.
That's North County.
Gotcha. Thanks a lot. Terrific. All right. Thanks. Thanks, Tim. And thanks for connecting people with resources and citations. Okay, Dean, we're going to go to you. We're going to talk about year 1 baseline monitoring events, Reach 5A, and upland disposal. And we'll kind of, I think, do each one, take some questions, and then we'll go from there. So Dean, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, I'm going to try to share the screen here. Let's see if that works for starters. Share. So I cannot really see when my screen is up. So if there's questions, Pat, feel free to interrupt me, but can you see the screen?
It's starting to share, but it's not shared yet. So let me give it a second. Yeah. What it says is you've started to share this screen share, but maybe unshare and try one more time.
Stop share.
Yeah, stop share and try one more time. If that doesn't work.
All right. So click share. Screen 1, share. Otherwise,
let's see.
It says to double click.
Double click.
The problem is it says I'm sharing on mine.
Let's do this actually. Let me, Dean, why do you, I'm going to share my screen, and then you can just let me know when to click forward, okay?
If you have the presentation, right?
I do, yeah. So I have the one that you sent.
So let me get rid of mine and we can look at yours if it's working.
There we go. Let's give that a try. Okay, can people see that okay?
Yes, perfect.
All right, let me just organize everybody's faces so I can see you all.
Darn it.
And then I'll be ready. Okay, let's do it.
All right, I guess first, one of Tim's comments checking on the EAB and how they rule. I certainly don't know their whole track history, but what I do know is one of the disappointments was when they did rule against EPA on this site in 2018. So I know at least one time when they ruled against EPA, and that was for off-site disposal. But no, I have not done a track record on the rest of those. So tonight we're going to talk about a little bit about Rest of River and the activities coming up. There's various field activities going on right now, and I think they were in the agenda, and this is just a quick summary of them. Next slide, Pat. The first field activity of the year was baseline monitoring. So this is year one of it, and there's 3 objectives for this baseline monitoring. And the first year is just surface water monitoring. So there's 3 data quality objectives. One is to compare 2 different congener methods, and then we will select the one to proceed with in 2023. The second is to get a better understanding of the PCB loading in the rest of the river at the confluence and east and west branch of the river. And then the third one is to evaluate the proper locations at Woods Pond and Rising Pond Dam. Next, Pat. So this actually started yesterday, and today the first round was completed. The stations are on the left, and these will be sampled one sample per month for 8 months. So we wanted to cover the all the seasons with emphasis on the summer months where it's a little warmer and typically your PCBs are a little higher. So the first 2 sampling locations, East Branch and West Branch, that's what feeds into the main stem or into the rest of river. So there's going to be a study there over 8 months to see if it's predominantly East Branch, predominantly West Branch, or a mix. And if it's, for example, 99% East Branch, then going forward, there's really no reason to continue with the West Branch sampling. So that's one objective. Farther down on the left, you'll see Woods Pond Dam. There's 2 potential locations. We're trying to see which is the best one, and so we'll compare the data. Schweitzer Bridge is where I think the historical sampling has been conducted. There's some advantages to have it more under GE's control right at the dam outlet, but we want to make sure that the data is comparable. So that's the reason for that. They might be able to do some more automated sampling there, which may help in the winter. And that's the same situation with Rising Pond. Can we do it right at the dam outlet, or is it better to go to the next street crossing, which is Division Street? And then lastly, you'll see in the middle column, there's 2 different analytical methods. They'll all be run, they're both congener methods, and GE is required to do a comparison of those, and based on 8 months of data at these 8 stations, we should be able to evaluate the proper method going forward. And then the last thing is at EPA that we do the field oversight, and we will be collecting 1 sample per sampling event, 1 split sample. I think this, so we did do that this round out. The samples again were yesterday and today. So that's it. Next, Pat. At the upland disposal facility, the sampling, the investigations have initiated. They initiated the week last Monday with the mobilization of a drilling company to date, and they've been drilling for the last 2 weeks. 2 borings have been advanced and converted into piezometers, and piezometers is it's like a micro well. You don't use it to collect water quality data, but you can do water quality elevations. So those are ongoing, and that program will go on, as much as 6 weeks. I can see the question, Claire. I'll get to that in a second.
Okay,
Thank you.
good.
Also going on is the baseline habitat assessment, including wetland surveys. GE's on tap to start that, as soon as now to get out there, and that'll be several months. And if there needs to be follow-up next year for anything that's missed, that will happen. Some more engineering related topics like bathymetric surveys, that's underwater topo survey, basically, fancy name, and then a topo survey so they can map out the upland disposal area. I think for the habitat assessment, it's AECOM. I have to, Jane, I will get back to you. The person's been out here many, many times. Chris Smith's not on the phone. I think it's Lowry, Dennis Lowry. I know it's Dennis Lowry, I just can't remember where he's from. I think he's from AECom, but Kelsey, if someone can take notes, I will get back to that.
Yep, we'll take a look at him.
The weather station, that was a request of some of the commenters that it would be really good to get a weather station installed at the facility. GE initially said, no, you can use the Pittsfield Airport, and we rejected that. So that will go up. And then the desktop, or the called the desktop, it's more of a can you let Mr. Conan in there? It's more of a historical review of records to see if there's any potential for cultural resources at the upland disposal facility. That is separate from the overall cultural resource assessment of the river valley. Next slide.
Dean, you mind just answering? There was a question about split samples.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that because that's coming up. So I'll just do it when we see a slide of sampling. Yeah. This is the layout of the UDF, which I don't know what color you want to call it, light yellow on the inside. That is where the actual disposal area is proposed to go, and you can see that's what's ringed with piezometers and borings. The solid red ones, well, the ones with MW are monitoring wells, and some are just borings, which means it will not be converted to a piezometer or a well. Those are for geotechnical reasons mostly. And in an open circle, I can't do the codes right now, might be a piezometer. So the two that have been completed are on the southeast side of the proposed UDF. And as Claire pointed out last week, so this is the area where the actual disposal is designated to occur. To the north of this map is also GE property, and you can see it's heavily wooded and more ecological value. The assessment, the habitat assessment, will cover the entirety of GE's parcel in the event that there's some staging areas needed or other activities. Next. Hopefully we sent out, if some of the screen is cut off, you should have the full screen, the full PDF. This just designates what's happening in each of the borings. Some are just for geotechnical data. Some will be called soil environmental data, which would be, for example, a PCB sample or volatile organic carbons. When GE puts a boring in, there's an inner tube or an annular tube, and they do pull out soil from the full length of that boring. And then the plan requires certain segments of that boring at certain depths to be recovered, homogenized, sent off to a laboratory. And for environmental data, like I said, it will be for PCBs. So what a split sample is for soil, GE will put, say, 16 ounces in a stainless steel bowl, homogenize it very well. They will take eight ounces, put it in the jar for their lab, and then EPA will take the other 8 ounces and send it off to a lab that we subcontract with for the same exact parameters. So that's what a split sample is. You can do it with water as well. For air, it's a little different. Some media is a little different, and it'll be called co-located because you can't really split the air sample in half. So what you'll do is set two monitors right next to each other. That would be called a co-located sample. But a split sample is when you can do the best to homogenize the sample itself. And then just one more piece of quality control data that you might see somewhere. There's a lot of terms. One of them might be a duplicate sample. And that is where the same entity, say GE or EPA, collects two discrete samples from the same general location or the same location. And that's really just to test the homogeneity of the area. It's not really a measurement of the lab or how you're collecting it. It just may show you that, you know what, around, it could be 10, it could be 20, that's all kind of the same number. So there's duplicates, there's splits, there's a lot. But short version is GE will be doing the bulk of it, and EPA in general would be collecting approximately 5% for split samples. Next. Next would be what's coming up starting in April, probably late April. The sampling plan has been approved for floodplain samples right now. The sediment and riverbank samples, GE has to resubmit and just finalize the plan, but the numbers are pretty well set. So this is in Reach 5A. This is the Pittsfield Reach from the wastewater, from the confluence of the east and west branch off of Pomeroy Ave, all the way down to the line between Pittsfield and Lenox. There is sediment, riverbank, and floodplain sampling required by GE. Pre-design sampling to start designing or to evaluate, especially in the floodplain, how much remediation needs to happen. Same for the riverbanks. That's to determine how and where the sampling is going to happen. For the sediment, since in Reach 5A, it's all the sediment from one side of the bank to the other, down to a depth of 2 to 3 feet, needs to be removed and capped. It's not so much to determine the limits of excavation, but determine the concentrations to evaluate whether the material can be placed in the upland disposal facility or whether it has to go off-site. Typically, the results from the lab would come in 21 days, and then there's another step called data validation where you look at some of the data quality, and that's another 21 days. Jane, you bring up a good point there. This is a very long program, 10,000, 11, samples. If this was a smaller program, say it was sampling was done in a month, the report would come out maybe 90 days later. If you're getting at like how long before I can see some data, I hadn't thought about that yet, but maybe there's an interim step where we can get some data from GE without making it, well, it's helpful, but not making the effort 10 times as much to produce 10 different reports. But we expect it to be, it could be a full year to collect all these samples. So it's a really major sampling event. And again, EPA, our crew, they just increased, our contractors increased their personnel to have extensive field oversight of the locations, the sampling methods, and again, to collect our split samples for laboratory analysis. Next. One of the topics is what documents are open for public input. These are the ones that are currently there, and I'll talk about the last one in a minute. So 4 reports are in hand that we have put out, and Kelsey has sent out, and they're posted on our website for public input. They're 2 phase 1 inspection reports. I think GE does called biennial every 2 years, a very thorough inspection. So that's what these 2 reports are. And then every year, GE has to provide an update on the biota consumption advisory outreach activities, including posting signs, providing pamphlets, translating pamphlets into different languages. So those 2 reports are in, and they have, since it's not on really a critical path, meaning it doesn't lead to another document, there's a fairly long input period. And then EPA will, move on and issue the final letter. I will say in the Connecticut one, there's been some significant enhancements from the original plan that are outlined in that outreach activity, and GE's already done a fair amount of that with reposting signs, and I think there's more activities proposed for 2022. So the bottom one there, the long-term baseline monitoring plan, That's that report has been out there for a while. We broke it into two pieces. One piece is this short-term plan, which will be done this year that we talked 2023 and go on in 2024. It will include sampling of not only surface water, but adult fish, young of year fish, macroinvertebrates at one station in Connecticut, wood ducks and mallards, sediment, and surface water. And I have another table, but unfortunately I can't show it, but we will send out what's called the approval letter, or I'll send out the table, and it has the number of stations, the reaches, like a matrix with where surface water sampling is going to happen, where sediment is going to happen. I'm going to try and look on mine. There are significant sampling in Connecticut. I'm just going to call this up myself. There's 10 reaches in Connecticut. All of those will have sediment sampling and adult fish sampling. So, I just wish I could share this, but I can't, but we will get that out. And the letter is very prescriptive of what GE has to do. There's a lot of changes, which is why there's 90 days to resubmit, and it will be due in June. We just haven't, set a timeline for input. So that's just a real significant increase from the original proposal. Next. Pat. I guess before we go on that, I'm going to answer one of Jane's questions and we can talk about how to do the input. I didn't know if there were questions on the presentation, but let me get to Jane. You asked about when GE is required to take down especially the Columbia Mill Dam, but the Eagle Mill Dam, what type of investigations are going to be needed and what type of modeling. There's definitely going to need to be some hydraulic modeling to be done. I mean, this is pretty standard anytime you remove a dam, especially the Columbia Mill one is such a large dam. Removing it is going to have a significant effect on flow, floodplains, potentially flooding and scouring. We certainly haven't decided all the activities that are needed, but definitely hydraulic modeling. Whether or not freight and transport of PCBs is needed, I can't say yet. There'll be a proposal from GE, but I will say that the PCBs behind the Columbia Mill Dam now will not be capped. They'll be removed down to an average of 1. And that was actually modeled as one of the alternatives in the corrective measure study or the feasibility study. So there is some modeling, but I don't believe there's any freight and transport modeling with a dam removed. But hopefully with most of the PCBs removed, it's a much, much less of an issue. So really good question, a little bit down the road.
Dean, a few other questions about, there's one about, are you using Lidar in any way for some of the evaluation or assessment?
I think GE, I know they've used Lidar at least once. There's a lot of different ways they can use it. They use it for the topography. It's a good way just to do like an aerial topography as opposed to what would have been typically a surveyor out there with a survey rod and a transit, going every 20 feet. So there's aerial survey. You can do it from high up with a airplane, which GE did in December. You can use lower, it's not my expertise, but more handheld ones like near riverbanks, and by being in the water and doing Lidar like that. I think you do it a lot again just to get surveying and topography like in a riverbank, which is really hard from an aerial view because you got a bad angle or you got tree cover. So there is some use of it. I'm not sure the full extent of it, and I think you can actually, it's Lidar or something similar to do bathymetry, where you reflect down and get a bounce back and see how deep the water is. So there's various technologies similar to or identical to Lidar.
Right. And then one last question, which, and this may be down the road, but in terms of the dewatering facility, is that going to be on the upland disposal site? Is that going to be somewhere else, or do we not know yet?
A couple things on that. So the first The first area to be remediated will be in 5A in Pittsfield. It's more of a sandy soil, sandy sediment, drains very quickly. Before that is transferred either off-site or to the UDF facility for further dewatering or disposal. There will have to be some local dewatering of that material. That's what we did in the first 2 miles. Like I said, it's very sandy. You can build a temporary containment pad, It gravity drains and you can collect the water there. And then you transport it. Like I said, you can transport it all the way to Idaho. You have to make sure it's dry and doesn't leak. So there can be some local dewatering. When you get to the UDF, it may need to be, it will still contain a little bit of water. There may be additional dewatering at the UDF, but on a bigger scale, when Woods Pond gets hydraulically dredged, that will go in a pipe, in a slurry. That will definitely have to be dewatered, and I think the only real place to dewater it is at the Upland Disposal Facility. Whether it's within the cell itself, within the line cell itself, I've seen some projects where that was done, where it's literally just put in the cell, dewater. You can either, there's several ways to dewater. You can use what's called filter presses, and you can imagine just like doing mechanical presses and squeezing it out. And then you collect it. That would probably need to be built outside the actual UDF liner. There's some called geotubes, these large plastic tubes where you actually lay them within the landfill itself, and it slowly permeates through the tubes and generates water already within the containment cell. So I think the short answer is there will be fairly large scale dewatering at the UDF facility property at some point.
Right, thanks, Dean, that's helpful.
Yes, and as far as the whole parcel, the whole GE owned UDF parcel, the whole parcel, let me phrase it that way, will be checked for habitat and cultural resources and anything else. The presumption is maybe GE will propose to put the pipelines, from point X to point Y, and we want to have the whole area characterized prior to any decision on where anything's going. So yes, Jane, that will be the whole thing. Where does the water go? There's 2 options for the water. There's 3 options actually. In the Pittsfield stretch, I can say what happened there. There were 2 options. GE has a treatment plant on East Street in Pittsfield. If it's relatively close, which the first 2 miles were, the water that decanted or dewatered out of the sediment was put in tanker trucks, like a 3,000 gallon tanker truck, and transported to GE's treatment plant, treated and discharged to the Housatonic River. So that's one option. Farther away you get, the less likely, farther away from Pittsfield you get, the less likely I foresee that happen. The second option could be to put it in a tanker truck and send it to a licensed treatment facility, which I believe are all out of state. The third option, which may be viable, and GE did assess in their corrective measures study, would be to build a treatment plant very close to a large-scale dewatering facilities, for example, at the Upland Disposal Facility. Build a treatment plant there, treat it, and then again, you could either, if it's clean enough, discharge it back to the river or transport the I'll use the word filtered or treated water off-site. The advantage or the economy of scale at the UDF is for leachate collection, another component separate from initial dewatering is also going to generate leachate or water or material that needs to be treated and disposed of at some location. GE has not proposed yet whether they want to build a treatment plant at the UDF to treat both dewatered soil and sediment and leachate, or if they just want to collect it in tanks and transport it off-site. Or they even said at one point they could transport it back to Pittsfield. So those are the three options for water. One of the permit itself has criteria to determine what's allowable to be placed in the UDF and what has to go off-site. There's an appendix in the back of it. I'm not going to read it. It's fairly complicated. It talks about the number of samples you have to collect, for example, in the sediment. And there's a calculation that needs to be made to see if it averages less than, I think, 25 for river sediment. If the average concentration is less than 25, then that material can go into the UDF. If the average is greater than 25, it has to go off-site. So Claire, that's one of the reasons when I said there were, can't remember the number, 2,000 sediment samples to be collected in Reach 5A. That sample data will be looked at in context of the requirements of the permit to see what that average concentration is. And if it exceeds the requirements, then a portion of that 2,200 samples, a portion of that sediment will have to be transported off-site. And as I've said in every meeting and will continue to say, it's an average of 25. That means you can have samples above 25 and below 25. The permit has some further restrictions for certain sediment cores that regardless of the average, if that sediment core is over 100 ppm, then that material has to go off-site regardless of the whole overall average. So that's one step, Claire, is determining, or everybody, determining if what amount of material has to be separated. Then you have to mechanically separate, if that's the right word, mechanically separate the sediment. Floodplain, it's fairly easy. You stake out two areas, one area with the higher levels, with survey stakes and flags. You excavate that, put it in one pile. You go to the other side of the floodplain, excavate that, put it in a second pile. One goes off-site, one goes to the UDF. You can do the same thing in the river. You have to isolate the areas that had the concentrations that ended up having the average exceed 25. So I'm gonna say right now, I probably might misspeak on some of that. The averaging methods are different for each area. So I just want to point that out. The sediment, and I'm gonna try and look at the permit, so I apologize. Certain areas have to be less than 25 to go in the UDF. The floodplains, the average can be less than 50 and go in the UDF. So there's a detailed attachment to the permit. So it's not a simple answer, I guess is what I want to say, but there's ways to sample it, do some calculations, see if it's over a criteria or not, and then you physically separate it before you do disposal.
Dean, there was a question from Claire about, are you following LDR rules?
Land disposal rules for offsite disposal, yes. LDR, I believe, applies to federal called RCRA hazardous waste. There'll be no federal RCRA hazardous waste going into the UDF. So for example, what could trigger hazardous waste would be a certain amount of lead above a leaching. It's a leaching method. If you fail a certain method called TCLP, that sediment will become hazardous waste. Part of the permit is no federal hazardous waste can go in the UDF. So once it's hazardous waste, it has to go off-site and comply with all the off-site rules, including the land disposal requirements.
Right, thank you.
And what that means is you might have to treat that material off-site before landfill.
Dean, let's go through maybe a few more slides and we'll see if there's other questions.
Sure. I don't have a whole lot, so there should be more time. So this is just how you get to the input, how to provide input. You could do it either with the email that Kelsey sends out, but on our website, this is the first page you see when you open up the website, and the area with the yellow highlight, You click that box and that'll open up to all the documents that are available for that are currently within a public input period. In fact, Pat, you could probably click that little link there and it might work. The top one, that's a picture.
Oh, here we go. There
Up
we go.
above. There you go. Oh, and you're blocked.
Let's see what happens. I don't know. Let's find
I
out.
don't know. Maybe the show will be over tonight. In any event, you provide the comments to R1 Housatonic. That's our email box, just so all of our project managers have access to that. You can also send them directly to me or to Kelsey, but preferably to that email box, just in case, you know, it's just a double check that we make sure we have it. So that's where those are. The next slide, Pat, we had some questions about, you know, can we see all the public comments on certain documents? So on that same page, when you click stay up or opportunities for input, if you scroll to the bottom, it will show you which input periods have closed. Like the oldest one there is input period ended August 16, 2021. Below that, you'll see a PDF that has all the combined comments that EPA received in one document from the various stakeholders. So that is where we're going to store, so you don't have to go searching for it. That's where we're going to store all the public input comments. So they should be fairly easy to find. And it takes us maybe a week or 10 days after the comment period ends to compile it, convert it, check it, and then get it posted. But we are keeping up on that. So that is where those go. Next slide, Pat.
Good. What I can do, Dean, let me close it. I can just actually show the website because I pulled that up. So let me just do that real quick.
Yeah, it might be good to see it. It should be fairly clear. I'm trying to think what else I have. I don't think I have much more.
So there you can see that should be the website
Yeah,
there.
there it is. So you can see, I think if you scroll down a little bit, so on the top is going to be the current ones open to the public. There's a link to the document, the due date is specified, the EPA mailbox where you send your comments. Scrolling down a little bit, and like I said, we're continuously up, so you see schedule of documents to be received in the future. We need to clean this one up. That first one there, the 2021 biota report, that's already in. But you can see some that are due in September. And then on the bottom, you'll see the ones with the closed input periods with the comments themselves.
Great. All right. I'll stop.
And you just click it and you get the PDF of the comments or the work plan.
Well, I'll just click that and see what happens.
Revised statement, or yeah. So you'll see, hopefully it shows up. We kind of, you know, try to do a little cover sheet sometimes and then show the comments. Housatonic Railroad, whatever comments we got, we just put them in there. Are PCBs considered hazardous waste? Not under the, and Bob, see you are on, not under the federal regulations. PCBs are covered by a law called Toxic Substance Control Act. They are not technically, I don't believe, a hazardous waste. It doesn't mean they don't have disposal requirements. They do, but it's not under hazardous waste regulations. It's under various sections of a different regulation.
Let's see, Dean, I'm going to go back to these, to this piece, and then we'll see if.
I think this might be the last one I have. So every 5 years since we've completed, since the remediations have been completed in the first 2 miles, there's been some depositional or surficial sediment sampling. And this is scheduled for this, I can't believe again, but this summer of this year. The upper half mile reach was completed in 2002. So this is 20 years later. Typically there's 40 samples collected in the area that was remediated, and same thing for the 1.5 mile reach, much longer reach, about 140 samples to be collected. I don't know why I put 10% here. I think we do 5%, maybe we're doing 10% because it's a smaller volume. So this is the material that's been deposited on top of the cap in the upper half mile. There's freshly deposited sediment every year that comes down from the river as a normal river system. And in the 1.5 miles, although it wasn't a cap for stability, there was armor stone or riprap at the bottom of the channel, but there is significant deposition. So this will be, I think we did 2007, 12, 17, and this will be the 5th time that post-remediation sampling will occur in the upper 1/2 mile and 1.5 mile reach. And that data, Jane, or everyone, it's a much smaller program, so it'll be much quicker. And quicker, I mean 3 to 4 months to get for GE to submit a report.
Thank you. All right, well, why don't we, there are additional questions either for Rest of River or for the.
So Claire has a question, and maybe Bob can weigh in. You don't understand how PCBs are not a hazardous waste? Well, I don't know how to answer that other than the federal regulations define what EPA or what federal regs call RCRA, Resource Conservation Recovery Act, hazardous waste. There's a definition in there. PCBs are not in that, and maybe it was the timing of the regulations, but they are regulated under another law called TSCA. It doesn't mean they're not hazardous in the common known meaning of that word. They're just not federal hazardous waste.
Bob, do you want to say more about that? Then I'll go to Audrey.
Yeah, I think Dean captured it. I think those TSCA rules, the rules governing PCBs, probably predated a lot of the rules establishing what was meant by federal hazardous waste. Those land disposal restrictions don't apply to PCBs; they only apply to those other hazardous wastes. So under the TSCA regulations, you could dispose of, in most cases, up to 500 parts per million in a lined landfill.
Right, thanks, Bob. Audrey, over to you.
Yeah, I just want to say for the record, Dean made a statement earlier that I really strongly disagree with. I don't believe in 2018 that the Environmental Appeals Board ruled against EPA. You have to remember that the Environmental Appeals Board was created by the U.S. Department of Environmental Protection to add another layer of bureaucracy within the agency for the administrative appeal to go through before we can move forward. As I understand it, if I remember correctly, overwhelmingly they approved the permit in that appeal, and they remanded a portion of it back to EPA to do additional work. I don't think that you can call that as ruling against EPA. So that's just my comment.
That's a really good clarification. I was just not happy with the remand, sorry, but you're right. They upheld, dismissed, or whatever the word is, the remediation portion of the permit, remanded back, which means we couldn't immediately proceed, but you're right, Audrey.
Right, and you got—
my only point was they just didn't completely,
right.
Tim was given the impression they just rubber stamp everything the region does.
And I remember in
That's not
meetings,
true.
I remember in subsequent meetings, you being very, very happy that they accepted so much of it.
I just wasn't
Right.
happy. I wanted the whole thing.
So I would not call that a defeat in any sense of, and I have looked back to see how many cases that EPA has, that the Environmental Appeals Board, it's really EPA, has ruled in terms of people appealing this who are non-EPA related. And they're very few. It's minuscule. So I do agree with Tim's original point. That's all, just clarification. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it. I was, like I said, I like to win the whole thing, but your clarification was much more precise.
Great. Thanks, Audrey. Really appreciate it. Charlie, over to you. And Charlie, is that the Pittsfield River? And is that the Housatonic in 2075?
Yeah, that's I'm up to my butt in alligators. with everybody saying bad things out there. So now that's obviously that's a picture I took in Florida when you should go down in February when all the alligators are together. So my question is, I think this is the first time I've ever heard about homogenized soil samples. So I'm not quite sure what that means. If you could explain that a little bit, Dean, what
Sure.
it means to
Absolutely. trying, I have to think for a second. So I guess almost no matter what size sample you take, if you're in the floodplain and you want to get something representative of the top foot, so 0 to 1 foot, the sample method would be to put a cylinder in there, say if you can picture like a 2-inch diameter cylinder, push it down 1 foot. There's ways that you make sure that it doesn't spill out the bottom. You cap the top, you cap the bottom, you pull it out. So now you have 1 foot of soil. There's obviously some stratigraphy in there. It's 1 foot, a little different on the top, a little different on the middle, a little different on the bottom. What we're looking for is something representative of that whole foot. So you dump that tube into a bowl. That you dump that tube into a bowl and mix it up as best you can. Now you can do that with PCBs, although they're slightly volatile. That it's not prohibited when you homogenize this. So all that means is it's not homogenizing 20 acres of soil into one sample. It's one sample. You mix it together and you collect the sample. We do have in the riverbanks where they can homogenize, up to the first 3 feet. They'll collect it. They might be able to. I have to look back, but you can homogenize 3 different samples into one the same way. You would pour the 3 tubes into a bowl, mix it up, get it representative, and send it to the lab. So that's what we mean by homogenizing. So you didn't just take, you think you did a 0 to 1, but you really only put the top inch into the jar. That's what you want to avoid.
Charlie, any follow up?
Okay. Yep. Yeah, I follow that. And when this sample is actually going to be tested, explain to me maybe the process of how all of that sample is tested for PCBs. They shine a light on it. What do they do with that? How do they really find the extent of PCBs in there? If in fact there's, this little section after you mixed it up has all the PCBs and all the rest of it doesn't have any.
Right. So I will do my best. I was not very good at chemistry.
Always ask for your best, Dean.
That's right. So you mix it up. So you presume that, you don't presume, you try to homogenize as best you can. So that's step 1. The lab will have a certain volume of, I'm going to stick to PCBs for now. I think that's mostly what you're looking at. Each method is completely different. But for PCBs, say it's a 4-ounce jar. So in the field, you get it as homogenized as possible, put it in a 4-ounce jar, put it on ice, send it to the lab. The lab will weigh, and I might be wrong on this, so might not be 100% correct. So I'll just do my best. The lab will weigh it and get what's called the dry weight of the sample. Actually, they may take a subset of, they may rehomogenize, take a subset of that 4 ounces. All 4 ounces, I don't think, go in the machine. So they will take it, dry it, and get what's called the dry weight. For example, what they're putting in the machine, and I'll talk about that in a minute, is 1 gram of dirt, soil we're putting in the machine. Then the hard part is they have to extract, it's called extract out, remove, pull out the PCBs off the soil, because the PCBs like to stick to the soil. That's called the extraction method. So there's certain, this is where it gets over my head. There's certain ways to extract it with certain chemicals. I know some of the names, they don't mean anything to me. Soxhlet extraction, liquid something. So bottom line is they pull out probably in a liquid form, the PCBs. Then they take that liquid, they know the volume, put it through a gas chromatograph, I believe, and it separates out all chemicals, and you can compare it to a known sample that went through a chromatograph. This is like a tape that shows peaks and valleys of these compounds. It's called a loop. They all kind of come out at different times. So you have a time scale on this printer sheet, if you can picture that. And PCBs are very heavy and they're very slow to come out. So they'll be at the tail end of this. And you compare a standard to this one. You actually measure the peak heights, or now they use computers and do the area. And you can actually quantify the amount of PCBs in that liquid. Then through some math, they'll calculate and say, okay, out of that 1 gram of dirt, I'll make this simple for myself, 0.1 of that, there was 0.1 gram of actual the chemical PCB. So that will be a 10% answer. So those are some of the things you have to check with validation. Did they keep the temperature right? Did they calibrate their machine right? So they'll have to run a standard, just a pure PCB standard up front to get something to compare it to. Did they run that after the fact to make sure the machine was still working before and after? They have what's called spikes for a compound. They'll take clean dirt, spike some PCBs with a known concentration, make sure that they can see that, because if they can't see that, you know, who knows? So and I'm not saying it's perfect by any means. So there's a series of steps, but basically it's trying to measure the mass of actual PCBs and compare it to, I think they say dry weight, evaporate, boil off, whatever, the water. So it's dry versus dry weight, and that's how you get the parts per million. Hopefully that helps. And liquid's totally different because now you're extracting a liquid out of a liquid, and biota, I'm not even going to go there.
Okay. Thank you for that, Dean. This one I think might be a little bit easier to answer. So the around the dump area itself, you were talking about a wooded area that belongs to GE that they would probably use for any number of things, including maybe a dewatering facility or some other process that they might need to do there. When they're done, will they be replanting trees and providing that, you know, the woods that are there, or are they just going to leave it, since they own it, just leave it as open area next to the dump? Is there any talk about what kind of other things that they might do to you know, resolve any other work that's around the dump to put it back to more of a natural?
Right, we tried to address that in the perimeter. We did address it. So first thing is you have to know what you disturbed. So that's the initial habitat assessment. The disposal area itself, which is now 80–90% bare sand, that can be, when it gets capped and seeded, it will probably have to remain vegetation, native grassland, that's good for certain habitat, but typically you don't have vegetation with large roots like trees. So that's one area. The other areas, if GE doesn't need it at all for future maintenance, access roads, GE would be required to either replant or restore, but there's requirements that they really have good faith or detailed discussions with the town of Lee to help to incorporate any thoughts they may have. So that is right in there. Maybe there's potential reuse once the landfill's capped, but any plans would go to the town of Lee for their input. If there's certain requirements, if it's, and I'm speculating, if it's a state designated wetland and it gets disturbed, I think that would have to get restored regardless of what the town of Lee said. So I don't want to make it totally open that they could pave it and put a parking lot, but the intent is not to just leave it barren when they're done, but to comply with the restoration regulations and further get as much input and feedback from the town of Lee.
Thank you. Thank you. And because of that, I've changed from alligators to flamingos.
Thank you, Charlie.
Charlie, is that the highest I can get, a flamingo, or?
As far as the pictures I've got right now, I might be able to find something else for you.
I can't even think of what I want, but it's gotta be. maybe
Well,
a
I've
few
got,
thousand.
let's see, I've got zombies.
No. I want like an ostrich or,
All
a
right,
bald
how about-
eagle or something.
How about this one with my family in Hawaii.
I'll take that
That
anytime.
good?
Thank you, Charlie.
Okay. All right.
Very nice. Hey, I think Claire has a comment. She wanted, Claire, I think maybe you walked the site with, you know, if you wanted to share a few thoughts about that. Claire? And Claire, I don't know if you can come off mute or not.
Okay,
All
all right. I
There you
believe I'm unmuted.
Yep, you're good. We can hear you.
Okay. Dean was nice enough to get permission for us to walk the GE site because I was quite concerned that he was not seeing the same area that I was. And he brought along one of the consultants that will be working with him in the checking as the operation goes on. And I had a friend with me, Gail Surficial, who is a wetlands specialist. We walked from Woodland Road up through the woods, up the hill to an open area and inspected where the dump site will be. I pointed out to Dean that there's a large grassy area there, probably at least a good acre, maybe two, that has been restored, obviously, by lane construction. It's grass and some nice glades with trees. I've actually seen turkey amongst those trees. I have a picture of that. Then we walked all the way down to Woods Pond on the roadside. We walked along the top of along the edge of the dump, which is at the top of a very steep hill, which the steep hill is between the dump site and Woodland Road. We walked back down then to Woodland Road and all the way down to Woods Pond. And then as we went, we inspected the wooded area and what is a wetland in there of a couple acres. And I don't know, is it a couple acres? But anyway, Dean didn't seem to be aware of that area. And he said to me, oh, well, this will all be documented and examined by GE. So I feel like it was a worthwhile walk. I feel like I was able to point out some things to him, and he did point out to me and Gail that the dump itself will be rising higher than the trees that are there at the top of the hill, which are quite high. So when people look across from Lennoxdale, what they're going to see, rather than the mountains, is a huge landfill. So just, I think it gave him a little better perspective. He was able to point out to me where the pump would come out of the pond. I had thought that it would be way down towards the where the power lines cross the river. He pointed out that it was closer in towards the middle of the GE property. It would go up the steep hill and then go along a very narrow area. I asked him about what area might be used for dewatering, and he indicated that they'd find some way to do it because it was difficult to see how it could be done with all the trees and steep slopes and the wetland. And we were quite concerned about the wetland being contaminated by the dump. So that's it. That's pretty much, I don't know, Gail, do you have anything to add? Gail is here with me.
Gail, feel free.
Gail?
I don't have a whole lot to add because I think there's a lot of water on that site and I think that is being ignored. So you're saying you're testing with piezometers or something?
Piezometers.
Piezometers. Anyway, hold on one second, please. Okay, so I really wasn't prepared to talk, but I do want to mention that there is a nice wetland down on Woodland Road. And I've been reviewing the aerial photographs. Yeah, I've been reviewing the aerial photographs, and it looks to me like the power line has eliminated some vernal pools, and it wouldn't be regulated by federal, but it is an ACEC this whole area, this whole dump is in an ACEC. And mostly it's been mined for sand and gravel. It hasn't really been even used. I don't remember it ever being really used for an asphalt plant. And there's a lot of work going on right there. Eurovia is doing a bunch of work. They've got a NEPI's permit filed with EPA, and the Garrity's have rented and leased some land. They have a permit to dump stuff, I guess, solid waste. So that's going on. And it just seems like it's a free-for-all, though the power line seems like it's been cutting trees like crazy. And on the Woodland roadside, you know, we have a contractor who's doing a bunch of work, and additional, there's looks like there's some forestry being done. And I just don't understand how you can get a true representation of what's there when so much work is going on without, you know, a real review. And then I have one more question to ask you. I know I would like you to answer that if you could, or take away and come back with an answer. But the other thing is we're not clear where the routes are being taken to the site. Are you going through a residential area? Are you going to be going over 102, 7th down, I think it's called, what's the name of that street? Walker Street, over the bridge into the site? How are you planning to do the trucking on that site? We don't have that answer. We've never gotten that answer. And then you're talking right now more by GE. When you're talking about this hydraulic line, lines break or they clog. And there's no way that I can see that if you hit a hot spot, that you're going to be able to separate that out, because it's already going to be up at the dump site. And it also seems very unclear in your dewatering how you're really going to keep that off of just the bare ground. So there's a lot of questions that I have about this project. I'm sure I have more, but those are some of them. And I hope that you can answer those in a complete way. I know that I was talking to one person, they asked that question, what are the routes? Because those trucks volatilize PCBs, and they will be going through neighborhoods. So there's a lot going on here with this whole project that a lot of people don't understand. And we're very concerned about it, especially it doesn't seem like you have the dewatering down at all. It's just go ahead, march forward. We're going to put this dump in here no matter what. And we do know that it's going on unsorted sand and gravel. So you can't predict how the layering is going to be. So when you go to dig, it's going to be moving around. And then it's on top of Stockbridge limestone, which is also, I believe is a karst bedrock, which means that bedrock is unstable. It dissolves in certain areas. You can have caves. There's fractures in the bedrock leading to an aquifer. And I just don't understand why EPA wants to sanction. This whole area is really 200 acres. It's not just 20 acres. Why are they sanctioning putting, oh, now you're not calling it hazardous waste, but Massachusetts does, by the way, classify it as hazardous waste. Why you're putting this substance on an area that hasn't been tainted, yet you're willing to take a floodplain area that's not going to have, that will never be cleaned by this method, because really the only way you're going to really get rid of PCBs is through some kind of remediation, hopefully a biochemical or, biological, whatever. You're never going to get rid of all the PCBs. You're not even getting 50% of the PCBs. And how you justify polluting our aquifer, this aquifer that produces a lot of water. According to someone else, it's not my documentation, I haven't documented it, but there is a report that 2 million gallons per day of water comes through that aquifer. And if anything, that is a beneficial asset to the water, to the riverine system, because it eventually it flows to the river, and that would actually help clean the river. And I don't think anybody's even really thinking about how the river really gets cleansed. You want to pollute a whole area, and okay, you say your engineered landfill is not going to pollute, which I find hard to believe. But when you get into the dewatering, then you're talking about a different situation, because you don't really have it figured out. And I just think that you're pushing this thing forward without a real complete review. We've been under COVID. These Zoom meetings are really difficult. And I just find this whole process objectionable, and a lot of questions have not been answered by EPA. And I just find that insulting, quite honestly.
Let's try to get a few of the questions answered tonight. I'm sure not all. So Dean, I think the first question raised was, with so many different activities going on site, how can you actually adequately characterize the site prior to GE doing what it's going to do? So can you speak to that?
Yeah, so as Claire mentioned and as Gail mentioned, you have the picture up here. I'm gonna have to talk to it a little bit because there's no property lines.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Which is fine. So the three, you can kind of see the gravel pit and the sand, and I'll call them three quarry ponds. That part is owned, and people have the other slide with G's property line at some point. That is owned, and I think the latest new owner is Eurovia. I think you said that, Claire. That is a successor, or they bought out Lane Gravel Pit. So if you hear the two terms, sometimes I'll refer back to Lane Gravel Pit.
Yes.
They own, I don't know, 2/3 of what you're seeing there for the disturbed area. GE has no control over what Lane does, Eurova does. They can disturb it, they can actively mine, they can do their asphalt batch plant. None of that, as far as I know, currently, and maybe they did before, is happening on GE property. So they're their own entity, they're their own property line, not regulated by the consent decree. I'll leave it at that. I don't even want to go with who they're regulated by. So yeah, there is activity there.
Can I just add one thing while you're saying that?
Sure.
They have a NEPI's permit right now, and how can they determine what the true watershed is when you're going to be mounding the soil up extremely high? And quite honestly, they're going to wind up with your PCBs, because we know that because they told us that they're going to have to monitor for 4 times a year for PCBs. And how can you manage the storm water when you don't even, when they're below grade and they're going to wind up with your water? How can that happen? This whole project, the whole complex, really should be under an EIR and considered all one project, because maybe they're a separate entity, but they're going to wind up with your drainage. You can't avoid it. You just can't. And so I think that there needs to be a bigger picture here. And the fact that it's at the base of the October Mount, which is an ACEC, and we've tried to protect this area, and different corporations keep coming in and insulting this area just because, because people, are trying to live their lives and do their own thing. And here we get this toxic substance coming into our neighborhoods, and it's really being shoved down our throat. This town has asked our select board to fight against this. That's what we were paying for. And this secret mediation was really very frustrating for most people in our town. I can't say, so maybe some people just really don't know what the facts are, but many people are very upset in our town. And I believe, throughout the community, quite honestly. So meaning like the other 5 towns, there's a lot of people in the other towns don't agree with it as well. And it's been very hard to protest because of COVID and the restrictions and put aside. And the thing is this is really not been an open deal. And I'm saying that whole area needs to be assessed as a one complete unit, because the proposed dump is upgrading of Eurovia, and Eurovia is going to wind up with your storm water, and they're going to have to deal with it. and it's not, and they're not set up for it.
Great.
I'd like to just point out one thing, just to clarify. The area of 75 acres that GE owns that they bought from Lane was never disturbed. The area that you see is Lane's property that was sold to Eurovia that had been a gravel pit and has been for years. But the area where GE's property is, what they bought from Lane Construction was a conservation, a CR zoned area that Lane Construction had respected. You can see that very clearly in the way that it has stayed treed. They never mined into that area. They created a berm. They used it as a buffer area. There's a buffer area all along the old Lane Construction. They were very respectful of that. And they also did restore an area that they accidentally went into where they saw it was conservation on their maps. So they restored that area. We've been talking to Eurovia too, and we're talking to them about just how we can be restoring their gravel pits as we go along so that we can restore the habitat in that area because it's a beautiful part of town. Thank you.
Dean, do you want to speak at all to the access to the site in terms of a route or routes, or have they been determined yet?
Yeah, just a couple more things. On the right there where you see Woodlawn Road, you'll see a red house on the right, a red building on the right-hand side. The other area that Claire was mentioning is to the left of that road. You'll see a disturbed area right there. It's, I don't want to say small because when you're out there, it's big. That is the second area that Claire and Gail have been talking about. That is I call it a gravel processing area. So that's the other area that's being disturbed.
We had a contractor go in without a permit and do that, which is something we are fighting now.
Right. And so GE's property does have both undisturbed to the south, or excuse me, undisturbed and wooded to the north side there, and to the south is the disturbed side where the UDF is. So on the access roads, the reason that EPA has not announced it is because they're not known yet. This is pretty standard for the remediation process. You pick the remedy first, then you do the design. The access roads will be determined during the design process, and that's some of the many documents that are forthcoming. So there is no proposed route at the moment. That is why EPA has not announced it.
Excuse me, can I just say one thing? How do you build a house without knowing the full plan?
First you buy the lot and you get the money, then you build the house. I don't know. All I know is in
but they
super
go through
fun, you select the
regulations.
remedy, you do what's required, and then you do the design. As far as EPA's remedy selection method, I have nothing more to add than what was submitted to the court. There's really no sense in me trying to summarize it here. Also may be subject to future litigation. So why this was selected, whether it was right or wrong, that's to be decided in court if it hasn't been decided already. And I really don't have anything to add on the selection process. On the design process, I can provide whatever information I know and the process that will happen if people are interested in that.
How can you pick a site before you really know what the soils in the site are about? How can you select a site like this? It blows my mind. How can you select a site like this that isn't composed of varved clay or silt clay loam or something that won't let the possible effluent or whatever you call it, hazardous waste leaching in to the lower profile of the or terrain of the land? How can you even justify that? It just does not make scientific sense. I've been through some permitting processes, and this is one of the first things that you find out is what's there and how permeable the site is. How can you justify, okay, we want to stick our landfill here because guess what? It's convenient for us because it's right next to Woods Pond. And then that pipe, that hydrologic pipe that you're talking about, it's going to come right up over Eversource through Eversource right away? How are you going to get up through there? I just don't know.
It's coming
Well,
in.
let's do this. Dean, do you have any other final answers for tonight? I definitely hear Gail's frustration and
I hear the frustration, and like I said, I have nothing more to add on the process that already happened. The other topics are design topics, and they will be available for public input. I can't
would
answer
hope-
something that hasn't been proposed yet.
And just, I'm aware of,
can I
Gail,
just
one,
say-
just 1 second. I'm aware of time. So Gail, why don't you make a final comment? And then I do want to move to just rest of river permit status. Gail, go
Okay,
ahead.
I would just like to say that my hope is, since they haven't really done any testing yet, that as they go in and they do their topography, bathymetric testing to see just what this hill looks like and the hydrology and the karst under rock, that we will have some double checking to assure that this is the appropriate site. I'm just thinking that the testing hasn't been done, and I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that it's just going to show up that it is not a good site. And at that point, I would think that GE would have to find some other place. The only reason they got that site is because they bought 3 parcels for dumps, 2 in Lee and 1 at Rising Pond. And Sheffield was able to convince them that their site was too vulnerable. And they chose the one that got the least resistance. So people that didn't even know it was a choice. So anyway, it was just because GE bought some land that would serve their purposes. But no, I don't think they had any input from the EPA as far as where they were planning to put the dump.
Right. Thanks,
Thank
Claire.
you.
Thank you. I think maybe, I'm not sure who is going to cover kind of rest of river permit status. I'll share my screen again. And I think John or Tim was going to cover that.
Yeah, this is me, Pat. John Kilborn, attorney for EPA. On February 8th, EPA came up with a long ruling and denied the appeal or the review of the permit in its entirety. And on February 28th, we issued a letter. The regional administrator issued a letter to GE saying that the permit was final and fully enforceable and effective on March 1. So the permit is now in force. GE is required to comply with that permit and is doing so through the all these submittals that they are doing and that are required under the permit. As you can see on the slide there, they have more information about the EAB on EPA's website, and that's the current status.
Right. Thanks, John. A question, I don't know whether this is for John Kilborn or for Dean, but has the work begun to mitigate discharges from GE-owned stormwater pipes to the GE plant in Pittsfield? That's more out back on the site itself. Dean, do you know the status of that?
I know. Could you repeat the question? I want to make sure I get the right question.
And it's in chat, but has the work begun to mitigate discharges from GE-owned stormwater pipes at the GE plant in Pittsfield?
Most of the stormwater pipes are under the NPDES program, and there's been mitigation or ongoing mitigation under that permit, since it was issued. So it's an ongoing process. I'm not exactly sure where the current status is. I know GE submitted a permit for renewal, NPDES renewal permit, and I think EPA is evaluating that permit right now.
Okay. Thanks, Dean. All right, so we're beginning to come to a close. Are there any other questions about rest of river, about the first 2 mile stretch, about the permit status? Any other questions for tonight? And then we'll see if there's any other comment, and then we'll also just touch base about kind of next meeting and the like. But any other comments first from CCC members? Any other comments or questions you have? Okay, is there any member of the public who wants to make a comment before we talk about next steps? And you can just raise your hand or just note your name in chat. Okay, so clearly the beginning of a long process, still many concerns about the UDF. And I'm sure that Claire and Gail are not alone in those concerns, and lots of conversation to go as we go forward. And as Dean noted, lots of documents and monitoring and sampling coming out in the next months and years. So, things are picking up and a lot for the CCC to look at. So I think that leads, Kelsey, do you want to talk about maybe what you all are thinking about next meeting and also the kind of meeting and those kinds of things?
Sure. So we are hoping that our next meeting could be in person and likely a hybrid virtual in-person meeting. Right now, EPA in the region and nationally does have clearance to be back out in the field and meeting with the public. But of course, that's subject to change and COVID and as new variants may or may not come along and that sort of thing. But we're hopeful that we can hold a next meeting in person, like I said, a hybrid. So we would find a way to sort through the technical challenges of doing the ability to be there virtually and in person. And we're looking at probably sometime in June or July. And we will follow up with email and input on that, but likely we'd want to do, I think we would probably look at doing that in Massachusetts and then the next meeting in the fall, probably look towards a Connecticut meeting at that time. So that's really all I think we have on that at this point.
Great, thanks, Kelsey. Any questions about that? Next steps, Charlie? No, you're good, okay. And one thing to note for folks online is as everybody goes back to these in-person meetings with a hybrid option, we can't promise the hybrid option will be very satisfying because hybrid meetings often kind of are the worst of both worlds. So I encourage you all, if the meeting's in person and you can make it and you feel safe, strongly encourage you to come in person because it's a better experience. And I worry the hybrid experience, at least till we figure it out, may not be the best experience. So just to note that.
And I'll just add, I think what we'll continue to do with the hybrid is to also record them. So that way, at least if you're having any trouble with it, you can view it afterwards too.
Yeah, great, good idea. All right, any other CCC members? Audrey and then Charlie.
Yeah, I just want to say the meetings in general haven't been the best experience. So, I mean, to me, it doesn't really matter whether it's hybrid or not. I've been very disappointed in the last 2 years, especially during COVID-19. I think the EPA has really done a horrific job of the public participation. And as you know, I was asked several times to provide comments, which I did, about what the EPA could reach out to the community to get them to participate. And as usual, when someone doesn't like a comment, it's ignored. So I don't even know at what level that this meeting was advertised or the public knew about. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of people interested, but they don't know about these meetings and what's going on. That's my comment. Thank you.
So sorry, I can add to that too a little bit because I know that we've been getting some of that concern from a variety of different sources as well. And I'm happy to meet with anyone who's interested. And I know, Audrey, it's been a while, but I know at one point we did walk through the list that we have that we send notes to. We've been talking a lot recently about better direct targeting to especially the press outlets, because I do have a number of those, but there's over 350 people on the email list that we have, which these meeting notices go out to. And I know sometimes that results in kickbacks or getting sent to junk folders and that sort of thing. So I know that that's a concern and we're working towards, sending separate emails to press outlets, for instance. But if anybody has input on better targeting, I'm happy to, talk about that. I'm also always happy to, of course, just add people to the list.
Well, I've mentioned this before. Sending out blast press releases does not get the press to participate in what's going on. I mean, there's not that much press, for example, in Northwestern Connecticut. And I actually gave you the contact emails and numbers of the press to call. I mean, you've spent tens of thousands of dollars on all kinds of stuff, but I never see any local advertising at all on what's going on that the EPA is doing with the Housatonic River. And it's very inexpensive to do. And yet, I mean, that charrette was wonderful, but it must have cost a ton of money a few years back. I just don't understand. I mean, I'm not even asking for people like us to participate. I'm just asking the general public so they know whether they disagree with our position or not. And I think when I talk to people, they have no clue about what's going on in the Housatonic.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I know that we have those contacts on the email list in Connecticut, so it's tough. We can send them information, but I can't force them to print, and public paid ads just are not worthwhile. They don't, you know, we've had a lot of experience with that. But if I could just add also that I feel similarly, and obviously I don't live out there, but I get the sense that there are a number of people in the public that probably are not aware of what's going on and the plans for upcoming work. So we are starting to do some additional outreach, and I will be looking, you know, in the future to you all for some suggestions on that. I think we talked about this at the last meeting that we do hold these quarterly meetings, but aside from that, there hasn't been, you know, without the cleanup plan in place, we haven't done as much public meetings or smaller community meetings, even to the people who are going to be impacted. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat. I see Jane says we should think of it as a marketer, and I agree with that. So we'll talk more about it at the next meeting, but we are starting to work more with CBI on how to better engage some of these communities. We're also we're working with the city and in Pittsfield, and then Jim McGrath is helping connect us with some of the counselors out there to start doing some smaller group meetings. So point well taken. I'm sorry I can't elaborate more on details right now, but welcome any input and suggestions on how to better do that. My concern is putting information on our website and just blasting out emails. You know, there's a lot of information that goes out, so we definitely want to be careful and target certain information going to different groups to really get them engaged and aware of what's happening.
Charlie, you're up next.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Audrey that the EPA owes it to this community to really push to get more information out there, especially about these meetings, and to get more people involved. We try our best, but you know, we don't always have the resources to do it ourselves, and we hope that our government does. On another note, for those who may not know, and I hope this doesn't embarrass her, I do want to congratulate Becky on the birth of a child. She has a little girl, and I think everybody really should, if Barbara was here, she would be thrilled about that. And she would say, we have another life that we need to protect in the future. And that's what this is all about. Getting rid of all of this contamination so that Becky's child and everybody else, all the other children, can grow up and be healthy and have a wonderful environment to live in. So congratulations, Becky.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that. I do have my little helper here.
Look, there it is.
Oh,
right.
yay.
Oh, look at that hair. Impressive.
3 months on last Sunday. So thank you, Charlie. Appreciate
Congratulations.
that. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Okay, so we'll be back in touch on about the June meeting. As noted at the beginning, there are some process ideas I think some CCC members would like to bring forward, and then really related probably to what Audrey just said. And then obviously there'll be a number of documents and or maybe even some initial early data, I don't know, to review as well. So we'll be back in touch with scheduling that. So with that, Dean, Kelsey, anything else?
No, I don't have anything else. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the time tonight, the good questions, and a lot of work ahead for Rest of River. So thank you all. Be well, and we hope to actually see you in person since a long time ago in June or July. So thank you very much. I think there's a question potentially, Kelsey, for your email.
Yes. I'll put my email in the chat, and certainly anybody that wants to be added to the distribution list can
Great.
just reach out.
We'll leave Zoom open for 2 or 3 minutes here before we close it. So great. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Be well. Good night.